The next wave of adoption for XRP will bring millions of new users to the chain, but it heavily depends on finally making the underlying blockchain invisible. We need this so that your grandma, who is still scared of the XRPL, will also join without ever realizing that she's already active on the blockchain. The feature I'm talking about that institutions are waiting to see is called Sponsee. It will enable institutions to do what they are doing best: onboarding millions of new customers to the chain. If you are now wondering how XRPL actually scales to real-world mass adoption, this is definitely one of the missing pieces that will help make it possible. It's also way more crucial and important than many people realize. Let's talk about it. Hey, what's going on everyone? My name is Krippenreiter, and this time we're going to take a closer look at the two most fundamental basic requirements of doing something on the XRPL, so using the XRP Ledger. For this we head over to the XRP scan website and look up my own account. So Krippenreiter on XRP scan. And what you can see here is the initial balance. This one is important. The objects I own, my balance that I have, which is 9.3 XRP right now, and the reserves, which is 3 XRP. Why is this important? Because on the XRP Ledger, the very first thing you have to do to activate your account is to send at least 1 XRP to it. Back then, when I started my account, I had to send 10 XRP. As of today, it's 1 XRP. This is what we call the base reserve. This is so that your account is active and usable to you. Second, whenever you want to interact with any feature on the XRPL, you will have to lock away 0.2 XRP for the so-called owner reserves. Since I own 10 objects, 10 multiplied with 0.2 XRP, 2 XRP plus 1 XRP for the base reserve equals 3 XRP. Why is it called owner reserve? Because of the fact that you own objects on the blockchain that represents what you are doing there. So on my side, when I click on objects, you can see I own a few NFT token pages, I own credential, I own trust lines, so Ripple USD for example as a trust line. I own a DID object, and this is all why I need to lock up 0.2 XRP for every object that I own. Maybe to make more sense of this, think of any game that you might play right now. Any roleplay game, multiplayer game, and think of your character. And your character in essence represents what the account represents on the XRPL. On the XRPL, my account owns objects. In a game, your character probably owns, let's say, armor, clothing, a cool hat maybe, a sword, some kinds of health potions maybe. So these are item types that your character holds in the game, which basically is the same idea on the XRPL for me holding objects. So it's the same thing. Health potions in the game, Ripple USD trust line, on XRPL. And the third requirement that is ingrained into XRPL is burning fees. So burning XRPs whenever you transact on the XRPL, so transaction costs. And for regular crypto natives like you and me, that's probably fine since we are all used to the complexity, right? Holding some XRP here and there because of reserves, no problem. But for regulated banks that want to create accounts for their customers, that's a huge blocker. They can't just tell the customers, go buy some XRP first to fund your account, right? After the registration, this is just unimaginable. For most people, that's already too big of an issue, which would scare them away and probably would stop the whole onboarding process for the bank. So what's the solution actually? The solution is sponsored fees and reserves. And this is something Control Alt helped design together with Ripple. And they actually also recently published a new blog article that breaks it all down pretty nicely from the point of view of an institution. Let's run through the key points one by one. So in their inside article, which is about sponsored fees and reserves, so XLS 68, this is the XRP Ledger standard number that represents sponsored fees and reserves, they talk about powering tokenized asset transactions on XRPL. And in the intro, this is really important, this is why I want to highlight this. As blockchain infrastructure matures, financial institutions are increasingly looking to offer on-chain products without exposing their existing infrastructure and clients to intricate network mechanics. So they want tech abstraction. They want things to be easy for the user. They don't want the user to actually know that they are using blockchains. Things should run smooth and be easier and more cost efficient and cheaper without the burden of actually caring too much about the blockchain. So customers want access to tokenized assets, stablecoins, or other forms of digital assets while retaining full control over their accounts. This is very important. This means that self-custody is still in play. So for everyone who was worried that maybe because of sponsored fees you will lose access to your accounts, no, you still own your private key, you still own the assets, you have full control over your account. Self-custody is super important on XRPL. So the clients for the institutions, they don't want to manage network fees, so the XRP transaction costs. They don't want to fund reserves or pre-fund or care about activation of their account or navigate blockchain-specific onboarding steps, which is natural, which makes sense. When was the last time you registered for a bank account and cared too much about their backend? Makes no sense, right? It has to be easy, it has to be abstracted, even on blockchain on XRPL. And there are these two quotes which I want to highlight because they really summarize what this is basically all about. First from Sam Elster, Senior Product Manager at Control-Alt. He said, "This feature solves a real deployment problem. Institutions with seamless on-chain integrations cannot ask end users to fund XRP wallets. It would be weird to ask them to do this first. Sponsorship lets the ledger rules remain intact, so nothing on XRPL in terms of the requirements changes. It all stays intact, while removing, and that's important, while removing the burden from the user journey. So the user experience gets easier because all the tech complexity can be abstracted and outsourced basically to the sponsor, which is the institution. And this will create a seamless user experience for institutional-grade tokenization projects." And Walter Bester, principal software engineer at Control-Alt, said, "Sponsorship puts responsibility for network costs on the integration rather than the end user. The end user shouldn't care about this. Instead of transferring XRP into a wallet the user controls, we submit a sponsorship transaction so the reserve stays with us as the sponsor, while users retain full ownership and control of their wallets on-chain. So the user doesn't really have to buy XRP anymore. The user doesn't even have to care that XRP was needed in the first place. The bank or Control-Alt in this example cares about this. They hold and buy XRP on behalf of you. When an investor exits, so a client exits, we as in Control-Alt, reclaim it and redeploy it to sponsor the next and the next and the next client, letting us fund wallets securely at scale. So this will scale. Why will it scale? Because you don't have to fund all the different thousands and millions of accounts. It's all abstracted. The sponsor has to do it on behalf of all the different accounts that exist in the future. But how will sponsorship on XRPL actually work in practice? And for this, we go to my little whiteboard where I want to draw a little overview for us to make this more clear for you. So when we talk about how institutions will onboard users on the XRPL, it's about the relationship that will be built between the XRPL sponsor and the XRPL sponsee. So the relationship between these two parties. So the first party that we care about is the sponsor. Okay, so who is the sponsor? The sponsor can be an institution, can be a bank, let's say JP Morgan, Ripple, could be BNY Mellon, whatever. The platform could be a DeFi platform on XRPL or an NFT platform like XRP Cafe. So basically any platform or institutions that want to onboard users on the XRPL without letting them know that they actually have to onboard via XRP first. So the role of the sponsor is basically to pay transaction fees, cover account reserves, cover object reserves, let's say trust lines, NFT token pages, whatever. And the sponsor can decide which mode to use. There are two modes, and I will cover them in a second. It's a little bit complicated, but I will make it very easy, don't worry. Which brings us to the second party, which is the sponsee, which is the end user, so the client that wants to be onboarded. So you and me, anyone registering on a neobank or registering somewhere that helps us onboard to the XRPL. But who's the sponsee and what's the task of the sponsee? So the sponsee still owns the account and the assets and has full control over their private keys. This is why it's still self-custodial, and this is why it's very important that this is the case. We don't want to end up being in a hosted relationship with the sponsor. We want to be self-custody. The sponsee also doesn't need to hold XRP anymore because the sponsor covers the costs. So the sponsee doesn't need to hold XRP for fees or reserves. But the sponsee can still use the XRP Ledger while the sponsor is covering the costs. But now we also have to talk about the two modes that I hinted at. There are basically two ways the sponsor can decide on how to cover the costs in XRP. And these two modes are Cosign and Prefund. These two modes, as I said, are coming from the sponsor. So the sponsor who wants to do the sponsorship has to decide which mode to use. And with Cosign, what this simply means is that the sponsor signs every single transaction that is coming from the sponsee. So it is a fine-grained control, which gives the institution the highest amount of control over the sponsee. It's ideal for sensitive and high-value actions because how this works is that the sponsee is building the transaction, and then the sponsor adds the signature and public key on top. So the sponsee is building the transaction, then the sponsor comes in and puts the signature on top, and then the sponsee again signs and publishes the transaction to the XRP Ledger so that it can be verified and settled on XRPL. So in essence, in this mode, the sponsor is basically approving every action that's coming from the sponsee. But then we also have mode 2, which is Prefund, which is what Control-Alt is talking about in their blog. So what is Prefund all about? The difference is that the operational overhead is a little bit lower because, as I said, for Cosign, since the sponsor would need to approve every action, the operational overhead is pretty high. On the Prefund side, it's different and the operational overhead is way lower. And this is because the sponsor creates a sponsorship object. As I explained with my account the last time, we have objects for, let's say, escrow, for, let's say, trust lines. With this, we would create an object for sponsorship. And what the sponsor would do here, he would take the XRP from his own balance and lock it inside the sponsorship object. Just like you would lock XRP into the escrow object, for example. Very important, this is very important to understand, XRP is never sent to the sponsee in any case. Just because the sponsor is sponsoring the XRP, or so covering the costs for the sponsee, doesn't mean that the sponsor is sending XRP to the sponsee in any way or any time. And how this is working is because of the object and locking away XRP into the object so that from this object the sponsee can pay the transaction costs. So in summary, in mode 2 with Prefund, the sponsor puts money aside, just like a prepaid allowance. You can think of a prepaid allowance. And locking away XRP is done through the object, as I said, and it's still owned by the sponsor. Okay, so this is how it will look from a broad perspective from the overview, but I think what is important also is to understand why this matters for institutions and what kind of use case is covered with this. So let's go back to Control-Alt, to their blog insights article, and take a look at why this matters for financial institutions. And for them, it matters because there are 3 points or aspects that they cover, which is something they are looking forward to have on XRPL. First, this is probably the easiest to understand, simplified onboarding. Users do not need to pre-fund wallets or acquire XRP. Why? As we found out, the institutions and banks are actually holding XRP on behalf of the users whenever they want to onboard new clients. The clients simply only interact with the assets they are approved to hold, let's say bonds or real-world assets, any kind of money market fund or stablecoin. The second aspect is operational efficiency at scale. So platforms no longer need to manually distribute XRP to thousands of addresses, or in the case of JP Morgan or BNY Mellon, probably millions of accounts. Trust line creation and transaction initiation are automated at the protocol level, so on XRPL natively without smart contracts, reducing errors because everything is automated, and cost overhead because we don't need humans to do it anymore. It's all in the backend. And then the third aspect is governance and auditability. Sponsors maintain visibility into costs, retain the ability to reclaim funds. So whenever the sponsee doesn't want to be sponsored anymore, maybe he deletes his account, the sponsor can reclaim. So it ensures that the client accounts never breach internal compliance policies. It's all about compliance, as always. So this is also important as well to make sure that the institutions stay compliant with all their requirements that they have that are non-technical. But what are some maybe institutional use cases? Now we found out how this all works and why this matters, but what are institutional use cases that they are looking forward to? Maybe even Control-Alt. The first one is about banks distributing tokenized assets. So it's all about tokenization. Banks can onboard clients to hold bonds, deposits, or money market instruments on-chain without exposing clients to XRP. So they can hold Ripple USD, they can hold new dollar-based money market funds, without actually holding XRP or even knowing that XRP is needed in the background. Clients maintain control over keys, while the bank manages network costs internally. So the complexity, the tech complexity is outsourced to the sponsor, while the sponsee is still in self-custody, holds his keys, holds his and owns his account and assets, and can be onboarded without even knowing that XRP exists in the backend. But this is also pretty interesting because I thought about it in this way, what you could actually do as a bank. You could offer anyone who registers through your site and onboards to your bank platform to get some kind of welcome bonus. So let's say you register, you have a new account, you go through the KYC process, and in the end, if everything works out, you get $25 in Ripple USD on your account. So you can do a lot of cool new things. You can, let's say, as I said, Ripple USD, you can do a welcome bonus of Ripple USD, or you could also send an NFT to the new account to, let's say, welcome the user to a new event that is upcoming. And the second institutional use case is about tokenization platforms. Platforms can sponsor trust lines for investors or clients, enabling instant asset distribution while maintaining custody, auditability, and lifecycle control. And why is this important? This is important because now you can separate distribution, everything that is in the front, from the backend. So Control-Alt, they are pretty good and specialized on tokenization and on-chain mechanics, but they're maybe not so good at distribution. Maybe Ripple is better with distribution. So what they could do is Control-Alt doing all the backend tokenization efforts, while Ripple is caring about the UI and distribution efforts. So distribution partners, for example, could provide an end-to-end user interface that requires no on-chain interaction for its users because it's sponsored from Control-Alt. All in all, this will reduce friction, even though I have to say, definitely not a super flashy feature, I would say, but definitely one that will move mountains for institutions to handle their clients on XRPL. But what do you think? Is this something the institutions were just waiting to see on XRPL? Or is there maybe another feature you believe that is more important? Maybe it's smart contracts, maybe it's batch. Let me know in the comments. On the right side, you can now also watch my all-time favorite video, or if there are still any questions, write them in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video far and wide with everyone you know. I wish you a lovely day, and until next time. Ciao, ciao.